proposed for the last 2 years to make sure that there's a per pupil share. And you would think this isn't as contentious outside of the building. It wasn't like some of the gun legislation that I've lived through, or the testing bills that I've had to live through. This was really very contentious within the building. So there was almost half the lobby corps, it felt like, was there just to kill this bill every year. So what we were able to do, and what made this year different than the last, is we were able to listen to both sides and approach this from a different angle. And it took everybody who were proponents of the previous bill to the opponents who were hired just to kill this bill to be willing to have that conversation. That took 2 years, and it took a lot of work during session. So what it was, instead of actually doing the per pupil share, we listened and addressed valid concerns, but still held our ground on the things that mattered and making sure that we were fighting to ensure equity for all kids, regardless of type of public school. So the compromise that came in, it was the Sunday before the last week of session. We were down to one word that we were compromising on, one word. And it was whether or not the whole deal was going to fall apart or if we were going to be able to move forward. And groups who were down there who have been building coalitions to make sure that this never passed ultimately ended up being neutral. It was one of the biggest lifts I've ever had, and something that most people would think is impossible. There's definitely days, every day was a roller coaster with this bill, and they all were neutral or supportive. So I show up to caucus, I send all my information out, we talk about who's neutral, who's supporting, the great work we did. You know, I think that this is going to be unanimous support because we solved a problem in a fair way. And that day is when everything started blowing up. And that picture that you describe, I think, unfortunately, they use that all the time when they're talking about me in the news. So it's like constantly coming up, this very lonely picture of me on the House floor looking at my phone. So I hope they update that one day. It really depicted kind of what it felt like to do this work, to be so proud at solving this problem, to bring so many people together to address this, and then ultimately the misinformation and the politics that you have to deal with, unfortunately, even when you're doing this work and doing the right thing. So after that night, they were filibustering the bill. It was a very long night, but we ended up getting it done. And I still deal with a ton of misinformation around this bill. I think that it's frustrating because when you solve big problems, it's easy to throw rocks at it instead of, I think ultimately why we're all here, why we run for office, is because we care about doing the right thing and making sure that we actually are fighting for those kids. So I'm proud of the work we did, but that picture is definitely reflective of the entire experience.
So, and what was the contentious word?
The contentious word?
The word that you were fighting, the one word that it came down to.
I don't even remember anymore.
Okay, so for the civilians in the room, if I understand the bill right, it extended what we think of as levy dollars, local property tax dollars,
yes,
assessed by a district to charters in that district's geographic boundaries for some kinds of programming. And then the charters had to do what in exchange? What was the other half of the...
I love that we're going to get into the policy piece because usually people just want the overall message. So I'm glad I'm in a room of wonks. What we ended up doing was ensuring that we were protecting every student, and especially the historically disadvantaged students, so the ones that cost more to educate, really putting it back to the districts to create a plan and saying for these types of students, we're going to allocate this much money, and making sure that they're not going to differentiate those resources based on the type of school that the student's attending. So you gave flexibility to districts and really elevated the equity piece and protections for all kids. And so I thought that that was a really important piece. It was our version in the House, the Democratic version, and it ended up going through the Senate. They knew if they touched it that it was going to all fall apart. So I walked into the Senate floor and I saw the Senate sponsors kind of sitting there quietly while everybody was debating, and no other amendments got on. And actually, Senator Angela Williams